Good evening, viewers. So we are here today again with Dr. Adityanjee. Dr. Adityanjee is the President of Council for Strategic Affairs. So we have the privilege of calling him again and again whenever we have some important topic related to geopolitics. So today we are going to discuss about the India-China border row. It has been on for almost 2 years. So welcome Dr. Adityanjee. Welcome to our platform.
Thank you again. Very pleased to be on your platform and happy that you are inviting me over and over again.
Thank you, sir. It's our pleasure. So we are just straightway, we are moving to the issue, and we all know that the India-China border is nearly 3,000 kilometers long, and the latest standoff with China, this has been on for 3 years, and it doesn't seem it will be resolved anytime soon, because China still maintains nearly 50 to 16,000 troops on the border, and India has also deployed a very large number of troops on the border. So both nations have held several rounds of talks, including the military and diplomatic levels, to de-escalate and disengage their forces. However, the progress has been slow and fragile. So a comprehensive resolution remains elusive. So that's a big concern. So with this case that we see, Dr. Adityanjee, I am just coming to my first question. Since you are an expert in geopolitics and you always keep an eye on this international politics that goes around India, and you have been particularly interested in China's affair. So what do you think is China's plan?
So, in reference to India-China border row, I would like to make it very clear. Although the row is with China, but the border is not with China. India has border with an occupied country called Tibet. India never had a border with China. China is an expansionist, hegemonic, imperialist country that has terrorized its smaller neighbors and engulfed them and basically swallowed them lock, stock, and barrel into Chinese territory. The core Chinese territory where Han Chinese resided was very small. And if you see the history, when Chinese emperors have been strong, they have swallowed the neighboring country. And when they have become weak, the neighboring countries that China absorbed have become independent. So between 1914 until 1949, when PLA invaded, Tibet was an independent country. Similarly, Eastern Turkestan, also called Xinjiang, was an independent or semi-independent country. Actually, Xinjiang means new frontiers. Similarly, China has occupied part of Mongolia. That is a province in China. There is, supposedly a nation called Manchuria that has been swallowed by China because Manchu dynasty, Manchus actually ruled Han Chinese, and then using that as an exception, there is no nation of Manchuria. China is trying to occupy or retake the possession of Taiwan also. China has claims in South China Sea. I'm mentioning all these to tell you that there is no India-China border historically. What happened at 1949, Communist China and People's Liberation Army occupied Tibet by force and forced certain treaties on the independent nation of Tibet. And now, as an occupying power, China continues to demand more territories from its neighbors. It's not just India. China has settled the border issues with almost all the land border countries except for two. And those two remaining are India and Bhutan. And you know that they had tried to invade Bhutan in the Doklam Plateau in 2017. So looking at Chinese game plan, when you say, I would go back to Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong had said at one point in time that Tibet is the palm of the hand, and that palm of the hand has 5 fingers. And those 5 fingers are Ladakh, Bhutan, Sikkim, Nepal, and Arunachal Pradesh, that used to be called Nepal at that point in time. Implications was that if we occupy Tibet, we have to occupy those 5 regions. So they have occupied part of Ladakh, especially Aksai Chin. China still does not want to recognize merger of the state of Sikkim with India. China continues to call Arunachal Pradesh as southern Tibet. So China is an expansionist country. China is not in a hurry to have a comprehensive border settlement with India. You will keep on having rounds and rounds of engagement, military talk, bilateral military talk. For during the last 3 years, we have 20 rounds of military talk. All that has led to is slightly lessening the heat on the border, but 50 to 60,000 Chinese troops are still there facing Indian troops. Yes, it's true that the border war is in nobody's interest, but China remains a permanent threat. And I don't envisage in near future China would be willing to settle it, because that's their strategy. Keep India on the tenterhook. Keep on needling India all the time and hoping that in a democratic setup, there will be a government that will be weak-kneed and weak-spined, and that will capitulate to Chinese demands and give China access to more and more of Indian territory. They have been doing that since they occupied Tibet. So it's not just last 3 years. In 67 also they tried to attack and got a bloody nose. And then in 1987 also China had tried to invade Indian territory. So China has been doing it. Their strategy is called salami slicing. Keep on nibbling at the territory slowly enough to not cause major war, yet the territory accumulated over a period of time grows. They also believe in, winning the war without fighting any battle. So by coercion, by threat, by lawfare, by sabotage, by deception, they will use all the tech. And it does not appear that Chinese Communist Party, while it is in occupation in power, will engage in bilateral comprehensive border management. This problem will continue. So India will need to continue to be militarily prepared. It appears that Chinese aims at this point in time are on Taiwan. They do want to take back Taiwan by 2027. And in order to achieve that, they have to keep on putting pressure on India. And that is what they are doing. So in my analysis, the border situation with China will not be resolved. Whatever we may try, that's not going to be resolved by China, because it's not in China's interest. They will keep on keeping it as a irritant with India, and they are trying to basically pin down in the geographical region of Indian subcontinent by trying to encircle India whether it is Bangladesh, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Pakistan, they are trying to encircle India, trying to contain India. Hari Prakash?
So these recent developments, this is the border row. How do you think this has impacted the diplomatic relation between these two countries?
Diplomatic relations are not at their best. China knows it. India has said it. That diplomatic relationship will not be restored to normalcy till the status quo ante is achieved. And both countries know that. There are no high level contacts between the leaders of the two countries. This is in contrast to 2014 when Xi Jinping was invited by Prime Minister Modi. He was also taken to Ahmedabad in Gujarat, and there was this famous Dokla diplomacy. But at the same time, China sent its troops to India in Indian territory. So China always gives mixed message. At the time of state visit of Xi Jinping in 2014, you are sending troops into Indian territory. And Prime Minister Modi had to bring it to his attention. And then subsequently, China, in order to pacify India, invited Prime Minister Modi to Wuhan, the famous Wuhan city where the Wuhan virus originated. And they talked about Wuhan spirit. There was a 2-day summit, bilateral summit. This was followed a year and a half by invitation to Xi Jinping in Mahabalipuram, and it was called Chennai Connect. And it was said by Chinese side that the wisdom of two leaders will maintain the relationship between the two countries. But behind the verbosity and high-flowered language, China has an aim that is to continue to bring down India. And unfortunately for China, India has stepped up to the plate and shown some resolve that Indian interests are paramount, and Chinese are kind of surprised. How come India behaved the way India took a stance on Doklam Plateau, on the India, Bhutan, and Tibet tri-junction on Doklam Plateau. So that was the first message to China when there was a 74-day long standoff, and that was followed by Galwan clash. And in Galwan clash, although 20 Indian soldiers lost their lives, China finally admitted grudgingly that 4 Chinese soldiers lost their lives. But intelligence reports suggest that it may be many more than them. People counted the cemeteries and all in that particular area where those soldiers were buried, and people could count many more new headstones. So China is always economical with truth, always using deception, always being expansionist, and that situation is not going to change. China wants to subdue India in order to proclaim its supremacy in the Asian sphere. If China can subdue India, China would be the unquestioned leader in Asia, and nothing will stop China from being superpower numero uno, number one, hyperpower displacing United States. And the only country that is giving a bloody nose to China is India. And that situation will not be resolved because, as I said, unlike India, China remains a hegemonic, pensionist, imperialist country that is always looking for territory.
So, what do you think are the key factors that contribute to the tension in this region?
Well, I have already stated is Chinese intentions grabbing more territory and having its, overlordship about over all the Asian countries. I'll tell you, there is a defense dialogue called Shangri-La Dialogue that is held in Singapore pretty much every year. It is arranged by a British think tank called IISS. And in early around 2013 or 2014, there was a Chinese foreign minister and state councillor, Yang Jiechi. Yang Jiechi, in informal talks in Singapore, told the ASEAN countries that China is a big country and you guys are small countries, and that is the reality, and you have to accept it. You have to accept our bullying behavior. So China is upfront. You know what China is doing with Philippines as we speak now? What is China doing with Japan over Senkaku Island? What is China doing in South China Sea? So China's problems about territory, whether that is land territory or islands or ocean, maritime domain, China's thirst for expansion is not quenched. And that is the major reason of problems between India and China. And unfortunately, this will continue because China's intentions are not going to change. You have seen these intentions from 1949 onward. Despite the rhetoric of Panchsheel and peaceful coexistence, China has always been the aggressor with everyone.
Yeah.
Their classic strategy is to make a maximalist claim, then browbeat your adversary, go for an agreement for quote-unquote mutual compromise, which means whatever is mine, I'll keep that, but whatever is yours, I'll keep half of that. That's their classical negotiation tactic. They have indulged in that with every one of their neighbor, and they have indulged in occupying some of the neighboring countries like occupied Tibet. In fact, what is very worrisome is the Chinese pressure on both Nepal as well as Bhutan. There are bilateral talks going on between Bhutan and China. China is keen to have direct diplomatic relationship with Bhutan, despite Bhutan having a mutual friendship and assistance treaty with India. But China does not want that. They want direct relationships with Bhutan. And they are trying to negotiate a peace deal, a land peace deal with Bhutan. Unfortunately, the India-Bhutan friendship treaty was watered down during the UPA regime. So India does not have much say in that, what they are doing. But it will lead to what I call Tibetization of Bhutan. The Dalai Lama and his representatives initially signed some peace treaties with PLA in 1949, in which it was said that occupied Tibet will have total internal autonomy and China will just control the defense and foreign affairs. But what happened subsequently was totally different. China had this 50 years agreement with Britain on handing over back Hong Kong with one country, two systems. What happened to that? You know, one must never listen to Chinese rhetoric. One needs to analyze Chinese behavior. In fact, there is no character for the word, transparency in Chinese Mandarin language. So they have used deception as a strategy from the time of Sun Tzu.
So can't India do anything with Bhutan?
Well, as I told you that in 2017, India asserted its treaty obligations to prevent advancement of PLA into the Doklam Plateau. But at this point in time, as the treaty is watered down, Bhutan is directly negotiating the border deal with China. And I guess you have to let them do what they want to do with their country. And the same thing goes for Nepal. China has occupied certain areas in Nepal, but the communist-led government in Nepal is more favorable to China because they want to have an alternative land route for trade, etc., besides India. The current government is still much more restrained and balanced, but the previous Nepalese government under Oli, I think his name was KP Sharma Oli, was very much beholden to China and under Chinese influence and had very anti-India postures. So there are things happening not just with India, but these two countries that are kind of part of the five fingers of the palm of Tibet. So
But,
Chinese intentions are not good against these two countries also.
but India has a treaty of friendship with Nepal. This is a 50 years treaty of friendship. So does the treaty give India any power to interfere in such affairs?
No.
No.
At this point in time, it's not India's interest. Let Nepal and Bhutan deal with China. Let them do whatever they want to do because both these countries have accused India of being like a big brother, have big brotherly attitude, especially Nepal, not so much to Bhutan. So short of direct assistance in case of conflict with China, India has no obligation towards Nepal, although the chief of the army staff of both countries have bilateral, similar designations. But the politics of Nepal has changed drastically, and India is better not to, burn her fingers in Nepal and let them handle China so that they have a real taste of what Chinese expansionism is.
But that is also not in India's favor.
Look, India has to continue to increase our national strength. There's a measure called comprehensive national power that Chinese Academy of Social Sciences and some other Chinese academy actually enunciated, which takes not just your economic power, military power, hard power, soft power, smart power, manufacturing base, everything. And there are multiple mathematical ways of calculating the comprehensive national power. Chinese have their own way, Western countries have their own way. China's calculation is that as long as India's comprehensive national power is low, they can continue to get their way. So the long-term strategy for India would be to improve her comprehensive national power. I was looking at an index, still it is United States topmost, number 2 is China, number 3 is still Russia, and India is at number 4 position. So in order to tackle Chinese challenge, whether on the border, whether economically, whether in the field of trade, India will have to improve her comprehensive national power. And that is where, whether we need to do, more manufacturing. So we need to be able to build all our defense equipment. We need to be self-reliant or Atmanirbhar so that we can sustain a war with China if push comes to shove without, begging other nations for equipment or ammunition. So we have to focus not on Nepal or Bhutan, but we have to build our own internal strength. That is what will, deter China from any adventurous step. So we have to do internal reforms. We have to take care of dissonance and law and order situation within India so that there is peaceful development. India becomes an economic superpower. Only after becoming economic superpower you will be able to have spare cash to deal with military expansion of capability matching China eyeball to eyeball. Yes, we are spending money on our armed forces. Is that enough? Because there are always budgetary constraints. Remember in 2014 2004 to 2014, there was a proposal to develop a 1,000 strong mountain strike corps of Indian Army. And then proposal was initially brought forth with a lot of enthusiasm and then buried very shamefully by saying we don't have money to develop a new mountain strike force. 100,000 mountain strike force would have been good enough to deal with Chinese challenge on the northern border. So our limitations are that our economy historically has not done so well as Chinese economy has done. As I was saying, China has a spare foreign exchange reserve of almost $4 trillion. India's foreign exchange reserve is around $600 billion or $590 billion. So there are asymmetries, and those asymmetries reflect in expansion of PLA versus Indian armed forces. So we have to do internal reforms, boost our economy, boost our manufacturing sector. Without that, we will not be able to deal with Chinese challenge on a sustained basis. It's not a 1 week, 1 month, 1 year problem. This is a problem forever. We should not have allowed China to occupy Tibet. There was a buffer state in between the two nations. And since we gave up all our rights, whether they were consular rights, trade rights, we had some suzerainty over parts of Tibet that Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir had, we let all it fritter away. We cannot retrace the steps back. But what we can do is build our own country, build our own economy, build our own manufacturing sector, R&D in terms of designing new weaponry, armaments, aircraft carrier, nuclear submarines, missiles. We have to be a hardened up state. And that's the only way.
So, how is this international community responding to this border dispute?
International community is aware of it, but they cannot do a thing. India has to rely on her own feet to deal with Chinese challenge. International community is more concerned about China's attack on possible invasion of Taiwan or China's aggressive postures to Philippines at this point in time. Those are much more acute problems for international community. And in any case, besides moral support and some weapon support, India has always fought her own battles. India has never required foreign troops to fight her own battles. Indian Army is very capable. Indian Navy is very capable. So international community is totally in sync with what is happening, and that's why United States is engaging India, whether in Quad, the Quad comprising of United States, India, Japan, and Australia, or the West Asian Quad, which is I2U2, or Indo-Pacific Economic Framework. International community is more receptive to India's arrival on the table, on the scene, on the geopolitical scene. And India is developing friendly relationship with pretty much all the countries except for a few. That includes China, Pakistan, and a couple of OIC countries that are creating trouble for India. But international community is not going to fight India's war with China on the land border. Let's be very clear about it. India will have to settle that by increasing her strength. You will get moral support, you will get some military support in form of, equipment, ammunitions, or intelligence, but not in terms of direct confrontation with China.
So, if the war break out on the border, in the worst case, do you think India can deal with it?
So let me tell you something. It is unlikely that there will be a hot war like 1962. China knows that India of 2023 or 2024 is not India of 1960. They have tested India in 2017 and 2019, 2020. They got a bloody no. So they are not going to venture for a full-scale war. Full-scale war is not in the interest of India, and it is not in the interest of China. So I don't think there will be a full-scale war. That is number one. Number two is that Chinese know that India's capabilities, the strategic capabilities, the military capabilities are much more advanced than 1962. China has not won a hot war after 1962. They've been pretty much given a bloody reply either by India or even like Vietnam in 1979 when there was a conflict, brief conflict between China and Vietnam. The losers were Chinese. So their army is not battle tested. I am not, anticipating or envisaging any war with China, a hot war. There's a Cold War going on. India and China have a perpetual Cold War going on. That Cold War will continue, and there'll be some needling here and there. And I am pretty sure that Indian armed forces are very much capable at this point in time to give a befitting answer that has been, in evidence since the Galwan conflict. China would be foolish to, draw India into an armed conflict. China has more pressing needs. Xi Jinping wants to be the president, be the general secretary who takes back Taiwan. So they'll keep on keeping India on tenterhooks, but they will not go for a full-scale war. Having said that, you must never underestimate your adversary. You must never underestimate the strength of your adversary, and you should always be ready for a deceptive attack. The latest war between China and between Israel and Hamas tells you that you should never be complacent as far as defense preparedness is concerned. So although there is no possibility of an all-out war with China, Indian armed forces will have to be on alert, perpetual alert.
So, what do you think are the historical and geopolitical factors that influence this conflict with India and China?
Look, we have gone through some of these factors. There was a complex relationship between Tibet and China. China claims that China was the center of the world, and Chinese rulers were descended from the heaven. So the emperor was called son of heaven, and China was the middle kingdom, and all the peripheral states were the barbarian, and barbarians paid tribute to the emperor. And if you paid the tribute, you were the vassal state. So their conceptualization for Tibet, Xinjiang, or East Turkestan, or Manchuria, or Mongolia were that these were vassal states. And that's the mentality that has not changed, whether China is governed by emperors or a republican democratic system of Sun Yat-sen or Chiang Kai-shek, or now by Communist Party of China. That mindset has not gone. So those are the historical reasons. The historical reasons have to be with Chinese national psyche, national mentality of being an expansionist, hegemonic power. China has gone through cycles of shrinking and expansion. Unless China gives up that mindset, problems will continue. China occupied Tibet, claiming that there was, serfdom going on in Tibet. Dalai Lama and the regents that were managing the Dalai Lama in 1940s were exploiting the peasants. And of course, we have to, throw down that system and bring power to the people and all that kind of, verbiage. But ultimately what happened once, they took control of Tibet, Tibet's military was very weak, could not stand up to the battle-hardened communist troops, the PLA. And after having some accord signed 1949, 1954, they basically took over everything from Tibet. So again, we have to be understanding why this geopolitical situation arose. It arose because China occupied Tibet, an independent buffer state between China and India. Unfortunately, the international community did not actually raise any voice at that point in time when China occupied Tibet, because there was no oil in Tibet. And there were no, economic or mineral resources at that point in time at stake in Tibet. So Tibet was allowed to be swallowed by China. There was a conference in Simla in 1914. It is said it was a tripartite conference, but it was four-way conference in which the government of colonial India, British Empire, government of Tibet, headed by Dalai Lama, and government of China participated. And they came out with this McMahon line as the border between Tibet and India. Ultimately, Chinese, although they participated, but they refused to sign the agreement. So they claim because they had sovereignty over Tibet and they didn't sign that Simla Agreement of 1914, McMahon line that British draw is illegal. So we are not going to accept it. But this is a duplicitous statement because the same McMahon line is accepted by China while settling the border with Myanmar. So McMahon line, till Myanmar's territory ends, is legitimate, but it's not legitimate between India and Tibet. That is Chinese stance. China still continues to claim Arunachal Pradesh as part of its own territory. China continues to claim Aksai Chin as its own territory. China has taken some area from Pakistan, from Pakistani occupied land.